Let's see, let's just call this meeting to order then. This is entirely Zoom, correct, Cameron?
Correct.
Because of the orange status, so I'll get it started. Welcome, everybody. Will Mike be joining in, Mike Mendenhall, in a minute, do you think?
Briefly, he has to board an airplane in a few minutes, so he said he was going to call once he cleared security and got on the plane.
Okay.
So Mayor Caldwell will be running the majority of the meeting once he gets his technical issue resolved. Oh,
Now,
well, look at that.
I'm in.
There he is.
Mayor Pike, you missed your chance.
That's okay.
I can defer. We'll go back to the.
I have faith that the meeting will go faster if you chair it.
I was told ruthless efficiency is the word for today, so we'll jump in and get going. I'm sorry for the delay in getting on. We've been having some technical issues here at the office. So I want to welcome everybody. We appreciate you being here. I'm showing a staffing update. Cameron, is that something you wanted to expand on?
Sure, we have some good news to share and some sad news to share. On the good news front, I was hoping to be able to hold up my 3-week-old daughter to introduce her, but she's being nursed right now. So hopefully later in the meeting you can say hello to Sierra. The sad news, though, is that John Hiskey, who's been a senior policy analyst with us for the last nearly 3 years, and was one of the very first phone calls I made before I was even hired, but after I was offered the job, was to ask John to come join the league, and he came out of retirement to do so. And so, John, I'll turn time over to you for a moment to explain your plan.
Well, thank you very much, Cameron, and thank you to everybody. It was humbling to, first of all, have had that call from Cameron in the aftermath of putting together and reconfiguring the direction the league would be taking. And it's even more humbling as I was thinking back, perhaps my first league meeting occurred before most all of you were born. It was about 1978. And, that is truly a humbling thing. But in the aftermath of that, sincerely, I love this organization. Cities have been the backbone of what I've tried to be and working for them. In this context, many thanks to Mayor Pike and those preceding officers and board members who took us through such a challenging time. I call him the dean, meaning like a dean of the college of whatever, in terms of Roger too. I've always had great respect for Roger, but through witnessing this process of he and Cameron, what they were putting together, just even a greater magnified respect. And with Cameron, I've watched him from a lad, literally, as he was working from an intern through to the directorship. His intelligence, his incredible energy, and his dedication, folks. He is dedicated. He is truly committed to this effort, and it shows. And he's shown an incredible ability to attract wonderful new staff to this organization. I think. A big challenge when Rachel had accepted, understandably, a wonderful assignment in Salt Lake City, but to get Victoria to come over and join us, what an incredible strength she brought and credibility. I look at a Wayne Bradshaw, I think of the breadth of what he's covering. Carson, I'm going to get in trouble here because I'm probably not going to mention everybody, Meg Ryan, the entire staff, Nick Jarvis. Folks, you have a wonderful team here, and I was privileged and honored to be part of it. You have many important things to do here. May I just leave one thought? I was thinking back in my own life of a troubled time. It was 1968, and the nation had been through 2 tragic assassinations, Dr. King, Dr. Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy. There was a Vietnam War going on, very much a time of tragedy. But I remember a quote that I believe Senator Kennedy used it. It may have been someone else, but may I leave this with you. Said, some men and women see things as they are and ask why. Others dream things that never were and ask why not. And with you folks, I have every faith dreaming things that can be and will be, things will be better. And I thank you for the privilege of having had the opportunity to participate. Thank you again very much.
Thank you, John. we've appreciated your service on many different levels. That was well said, well put, and we appreciate everything you've given to the league. So thank you very much.
I'm sorry, Mayor. Is he going somewhere? I don't know. Do we have to vote on that?
I'd accept a motion to reject.
Oh, made. No, just kidding. Thank you, John. You're so awesome. You're on mute, John.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thank you so very much. I love each of you, and God bless. And I have every confidence and faith that things will go forward even better. Thank you very much.
Hey, John, Jeff Silverstream, I want to thank you for being a great mentor to many of us. You know, your contribution is amazing in local government in Utah. And so I can't thank you enough for the help you've given me, and I'm sure many others here.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. That is so kind.
I think you're just a statesman of the state. So thank you, John.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Thank you for your leadership during that difficult time.
Well, thank you, John, and thanks to everyone. So John will be retiring at the end of the month, but has pledged to still be available when I need a sounding board, and he'll still be doing some consulting work with Taylorsville City. So he'll still be around, even though he won't be a part of our official team anymore. So John, thank you for everything. And Mayor Caldwell, we'll go back to you to the agenda.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, thanks, John, for everything. You are a great example to all of us. Number 2, we have a review and approval of the minutes. I've reviewed those and didn't have any recommended changes, so I'd move to accept as submitted.
Jeff Silverstream, I move to accept the minutes as written.
Gets a first and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Hearing none, that will pass unanimously. Thank you very much. Number 3, we have conflict of interest disclosure. Does anybody have anything they'd like to declare if they have a conflict of interest on the agenda today? Hearing or seeing none, we'll move on. Number 4, we have fiscal year 2021 budget. Cameron and Nick, take it away.
Terrific. Thank you, Mayor. We do need to have a public hearing. So Nick, I'll let you coordinate with Mayor Caldwell to make the motion to open the public hearing and open up for public comment.
Accept a motion to open a public hearing.
Jeff Silverstream, I also move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you,
Chairman, I'll
Mayor.
second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, we're in a public hearing. Thank you. Cameron, we good?
All right. It looks like we don't have any members of the public on the attendee link, so no commentary from the public.
You need a motion to close the public hearing, Mayor?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
So made.
Okay.
Second.
I'll second.
First
Somebody.
and second, all in favor, say all in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye.
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 Any
Aye.
opposed? Okay, public hearing is closed.
Terrific, Mayor. In that case, there's a memo in your board packet with a couple of minor changes from the tentative budget that you approved in May. Nick, can you take a quick moment to provide people with the update on those changes?
Yes, so we updated as we've gone through in this Q4, we've looked at what we're projecting to be at the end of this year. As you know, we had an additional $220,000 from reserves coming in our tentative budget. As we've looked at our projections for the end of this fiscal year, it's looking like we're going to be putting more to our unrestricted cash balance than we expected. So we just have a little more money coming out of reserves in order to spend that down and be in compliance with our unrestricted cash balance policy. As a reminder, that's that we have to be between 25 and 50% of our annual budget, having that in reserve. We had been a little over 50%, and it looks like we'll continue to be at the end of this year. And that's why we're spending down these funds. There were some security issues. I believe we mentioned in the memo that we had an encampment on our patio, if you've seen that before, outside of our conference room. We dealt with everything. This was a homeless encampment. We dealt with everything, got the area sanitized and all, but we're working with our condo association to have some additional security, including a gate So we'll be putting some more money towards that. We also, a large portion of the money that unexpectedly is coming in is a $60,000 grant from for our luau program that we will be spending specifically on luau expenses next year, including an update to the website and online training. And I think, oh, and we are also adding some money, some of that money we are taking from reserves into contract labor, just so we have a little flexibility as we look for how we're going to fill that bandwidth that we're losing with John retiring. If you have any questions on any specifics, other than these that I've mentioned, everything remains the same from the tentative budget, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Nick? Hearing or seeing none, thank you for that. Will take us to number 5, league policies, procedures, and bylaws. Nick, you're still on.
We do need a motion to approve the budget.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, Jeff Silverstein, I'll make a motion to approve the 2021 budget for the League of Cities and Towns.
Christensen, second.
Second.
Thank you for that. First and a second, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. That passes. Now on to number 5, Nick.
Excellent. So we just have the Office of the State Auditor's Fraud Risk Assessment. All governmental entities in the state have to, hold on just a second. I need to get a resent link over to Mayor Ramsey. That will take a couple of
So Nick, as you do it, let me
now.
just take over.
Go ahead.
Okay. So the Office of State Auditor is requiring everyone to go through this fraud risk assessment. You'll see that in the questionnaire that the league scored 315, which is the highest in the moderate. We're 1 point away from being in the low. And so staff is going through the other recommendations, and we'll bring a recommendation to you in August. So we need a motion, Mayor Caldwell, to approve where we currently are
Just
on the risk assessment.
if you don't mind, Cam, jumping in. All governmental entities in the state have been asked to fill this out. This is the first year that cities will be doing it as well. The requirement is to have it presented to your governing board before the end of this fiscal year. And you'll see in the memo, they only had their final categories ready at the end of March. So talking with the state auditor's office, they think they'll have a lot of people coming in late or coming in below because they haven't had a chance to implement any of these. But we especially wanted to make sure we're in compliance with everything that the auditor is putting out. So as we sit right now, we're bringing this forward to you. There are a couple of easy things we can do, and we'll bring forward to you later that we can bring that just over the hump into the low risk range.
Anybody have any questions? If not, we'll accept a motion to approve the fraud risk assessment.
So moved. John Pike.
Second, Jeff Silverstein.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? That passes. Thank you very much.
Excellent. So we also have some quick updates to our bylaws as we are getting ready to get our annual convention going. Katie will talk about this a little more towards the end of the meeting, but we have the in-person relatively standard, but under a new normal conference as an option. We have a entirely virtual conference as an option, and then we have a hybrid conference as an option where there'd be some in-person and some virtual programming as well. We wanted to make sure that we're able to accomplish the business that we do have to accomplish at our meetings, at our convention and our annual business meeting. So we have added some language that if we are in a remote situation, we would still be able to do our nominations committee to get new board members and also have our business meeting conducted and the voting done remotely. So You can see as I'm scrolling through here, sharing the screen, it's just a couple little changes in wording that allow us to do what we need to do under our bylaws this September. If you have any specific questions, happy to answer.
Any questions for Nick? All right, hearing none, we will accept a motion to approve the proposed bylaw updates.
This is Jewel Allen. I move that we accept the nomination bylaw updates.
Thanks, Joel.
Second, Matt Durham.
Thank you. Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, hearing none, that passes. That'll take us to number 6, COVID-19 response and update from Cameron.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor. This week will be a big week. I feel like we've been saying this for the last 3+ months, but it's a big week because of the special session. It's also a big week because 4.0, Utah Leads Together 4.0 is scheduled to come out. I was on a briefing about it this morning and received a draft copy that our team is reviewing. And so hopefully that'll come out later today. We hear the highlights from it that Nick is now sharing with you. So the guiding principles that are listed therein are speed, targeted spending, enduring investment, flexible, and innovative. The focus of 4.0 compared to 1, 2, and 3 is really about the economic recovery and next steps. And it's broken down into 3 approaches: the 100-day plan, the 250-day plan, and the 500-day plan. The key pieces you need to know from a city perspective around these 3 plans are, first, on the 100-day plan, that there is an expectation is too strong of a word, but a hope that cities will use their CARES dollars to invest in the community and seek ways to meet those 5 guiding principles, and that cities, like businesses, will comply with the stay open, stay safe approach. In the 250-day plan, there's a heavy emphasis on investment in infrastructure, including outdoor recreation, which is why our appointment to the Outdoor Adventure Commission that you'll do later in the meeting is going to be so important. And then in the 500-day plan, you can see the top 10 policy items that they've identified. And in many ways, it reads like the same policy objectives that we've been discussing for the last few years, and with the key word here being reimagined. And so I anticipate a lot of discussion in the months to come about how to do things differently in these policy areas. As of now, the document doesn't have a lot of specifics, but we expect those to be filled in the next few days, and really wanted to make you aware of what to expect in 4.0. The Utah Hospital Association is also leading out the Mask Up Utah campaign. In fact, Councilmember Allen, you brought this up in one of our town halls with the Lieutenant Governor, and it's come up in this board meeting several times about the need for a public relations effort to encourage people to wear masks. The Utah Hospital Association is taking the lead on that. They asked for league support, and I told them I'd bring it up at the board meeting to make you aware. They're not yet ready to unveil the campaign, though we will have a PSA that we'll share later when we get to the public safety component of the board meeting. But nevertheless, stay tuned for info from the Hospital Association of what you and your cities can do to encourage mask wearing as we go through the summer. For
Great.
that, with that, President Caldwell or Mayor Caldwell, I'll just see if there are any questions on COVID-19.
I have a lot of questions about COVID-19,
Okay.
but I'm not sure you're qualified to answer any of them. Anybody have any questions for Cameron on the update?
I just have a comment. This is Jewel. Thank you for for just mentioning that I had brought it up. I just think that it was so, it's just been so important to turn that tide. So thanks. I'm so excited to see this PR effort.
And I literally, Mayor Caldwell, just received the email from the Hospital Associations with all of the social media graphics that they put together and their press statement. So Nick, I'm going to I'll forward this to you and we'll send it out to the board after the meeting.
Mr. Chair, may I?
Please.
I know that our CFO for the cities has a call today with HUD. But Cam, I wondered, and we're trying to get some clarity on the question I'm about to ask. I wonder if you might know it already. I've heard that some other cities around the country have, Cook County also in particular, have issued checks. I know there's the Angelino card approach also to specifically to residents at or below the poverty level, and that as a city, Salt Lake City's looking at working with our nonprofits who have existing relationships with residents who may be undocumented, who didn't receive checks from the federal government, and issuing some monies to our residents who, didn't receive that support. Our question is whether or not we can do so with the CARES dollars. I've heard, and it's been my impression through articles I've read of other cities' actions outside of the state, that they have done it, feeling confident that the CARES money could be used that way. Do you have any information on that, where it wouldn't be specific, rather the requirements for expenditure there are none, could be used on rent, could be used on food, childcare, groceries, whatever?
Thank you, Mayor. And the CARES Act has been a source of consternation for the National League of Cities, as well as for cities here locally. Wayne Bradshaw, Roger too, and I have received countless questions of people asking, well, can we spend it this way or can we not spend it that way? The Treasury Department's guidance and FAQs have been helpful at filling in some blanks, but there are still plenty of blanks out there. My non-legal advice to you is, you know what you can use it on, which is necessary expenditures related to COVID. And you know that at the end of that process, that Uncle Sam will be taking a close look on how you spent the dollars. You know you cannot use it for revenue replacement. And then they filled in some gaps in between the two. I know that there are other states that have been very aggressive at how they have been advising, or how they've been advising both the state and local governments to spend the money. I don't think that's our role as a league to advise you on how to or not spend it based on, we'll give you what the Treasury Department has guided us. So I think if you look around the country and you see that other local governments are doing it and you're willing to take the risk of having to pay the dollars back at the end and you feel like you can justify it as a necessary expenditure, then ultimately that's your decision to make. My recommendation to it would be to make sure you're coordinating with the county, since your money's coming from Salt Lake County rather than from the state. So I don't know if that helps you, but yeah. That's where we're at, because we've gotten lots of questions from communities all over the state about what we should or shouldn't spend the money on.
I'll add one thing that, and the Treasury's guidance on what the dollars can be spent on is doing this as time goes on. So Monday morning quarterbacking, we're realizing that where we waived some fees for businesses, particularly in use of the public right of way in order for them to be able to expand their services in a safe way into the sidewalk space. We waived fees quickly. We could have charged them the fees with a commitment to reimburse them, and then it would have been an expense, and now it's a revenue loss to us. So going forward, that's like a lesson learned, where right now we're like, God darn, why didn't we think of that then? But the guidance has been expanding over time. So I just throw that out there, where we're looking to support our local economy and it's going to mean a revenue loss to us. We could be thinking of it from a different approach to get a reimbursement and use those CARES dollars. Just a thought.
That's a great point. Appreciate that. Any other thoughts or concerns on the update? Hearing none, we'll move to the Amicus Subcommittee report. Cam, you're still in the hot seat.
Perfect. At our town hall this afternoon, we'll go into more detail on COVID pieces as well. For the Amicus subgroup, we met last week, and there's a memo in your packet that articulates what was decided there. As Nick, will you pull up the first slide, share the first slide? This is just the reminder of the state constitution's RIPR clause and the timing of the case and where we're at. So the committee, the subcommittee elected Mayor Miley Wilson Edwards of Cedar City as the chair. So Mayor Wilson Edwards, I'll turn the time over to you and let Nick pull up the memo that was in the board packet so that you can ask for a recommendation or motion from the full board.
Okay, so we met last week. Our focus was really, when it comes to all of this, not whether you're for or against the inland port, but really the local authority portion. And so, in the RIPR clause, and we're based, what came out of our subcommittee meeting was that we wanted the focus mainly to be on the taxation and land use portion. And so we didn't want to get into necessarily the weeds on some of the others, but keep it focused that way. There are, as with everything, the political aspect where we've worked with the legislature, and now we are recommending to the board to go ahead and file this amicus brief in support of Salt Lake City. And so that was a very brief summary, but the summary in your packet pretty much goes through everything. If there are questions, I can answer them. If not, then
Mayor, I have a question.
yes.
This is Dawn Ramsey. Hey, so I read through the memo that came, and in it said that we were asked to list other specific examples. I'm just wondering what other specific examples we are using to give for this amicus brief, besides Salt Lake City in the inland port.
Mayor Ramsey, this is Cameron, and that'll be part of the next steps if the board endorses the recommendation, is to provide some of those potential examples. For example, on the backside of the Wasatch Front, the Wasatch Back, you have the expansion of MIDA. That could be a potential example. During the controversy around the Cottonwood Mall redevelopment that was ultimately referred a few years ago, one idea that several legislators floated was that the legislature could create a project of regional significance. And if it was a project of regional significance, then rather than the city exercising the land use authority, then there would be a different board that would exercise the land use authority. We've also heard that brought up in the gravel pits context, that rather than having cities have the land use authority over gravel pits, that you would have a state body that would ultimately approve or reject expansion of gravel pits. So our objective in the next few weeks would be to work on examples and frankly ask our members for different examples of where these legal arguments could come into play in their communities. Mayor Wilson Edwards, I don't know if there's anything else that you'd like to add.
So I'd like to add something, Mayor, if I can have the floor. So Jeff Silvestrini, I sat on the committee, but I think, part of our discussion was we went over the factors that the league established as to when we would file an amicus brief, and we, I think, unanimously agreed that all those factors were satisfied. But one of our principal concerns here is, we have a constitutional provision in the RIPR clause. There's been very little case law developed about what that means, either in Utah or even across other jurisdictions. And the Salt Lake City decision at the lower court effectively neuters the RIPR clause. It essentially ignores it. But the RIPR clause is actually something that's consistent with the league's idea about local government being given the authority to do what local government does best. And really this is an issue where if we want the RIPR clause to actually mean something, we need to support it and try to get at least a determination. And either we're going to either find out that it doesn't mean anything, forget it, and the state can do whatever the state wants, or we're going to plant a flag and say that there are some decisions which the Constitution recognizes need to be reserved to local government. And while this is something that is confrontational perhaps with the legislature, it is within the role that we that we have always asserted about local control. So that's kind of part of our thinking. And we could come up with all kinds of examples where the legislature might do something to interfere with those fundamental local controls, focusing on taxation and land use. But those are two hallmark areas where we felt we had a good chance of prevailing. They're traditionally local government responsibilities, and we do them better than the state because we listen to people. We have the process to be able to hear people. We're really, the higher you get up in government, the less you're able to do that. So that's what we thought, and really it really is just a matter of finding out, does this clause in our Constitution, I think, mean what it says, or is it meaningless?
I would just like to add on to what you said. Mayor Silvestrini and Julie Fulmer has actually brought this up before. Draper's concern with this is that if the appeal were to be denied, the RIPRA clause would in effect become defunct and useless for all of us moving forward. And that is a major concern for Draper with the gravel pit situation.
Well, Cameron answered my questions about other specific examples that would be listed in this. I just wondered what a few more were, and I'll look forward to hearing what some of the others are. I agree this is a risk with the legislature, but I also agree with the fundamental role that we have as local governments and what we stand for. So anyway, thank you for your efforts on this.
One thing that we had talked about was, of course, the bandwidth with the league staff and being able to get this handled. And Justice Zimmerman, who actually had done cases on the opposite side 30 years ago, I think that's right, is the one that's going to be helping to draft the brief pro bono. Cameron's working with him. And so as far as the bandwidth and staff time, we didn't think that was going to be a problem either.
I just want to.
Mayor Caldwell, can I take a moment of personal privilege?
Please do.
Get the baby.
So there's baby Sierra. Just finished lunch. Can you say, you want to wave?
Congratulations.
So
There you
pretty.
go, you can wave. Yep, so a little over 3 weeks old. So it's been awesome, but also very chaotic and sleepless around here.
Yeah.
Congrats, Cam. That's awesome.
Yep, thank you. Okay, Mayor Caldwell, I'll turn back to you for the discussion.
So Mayor Caldwell, Jeff Silvestrini, I hate to, following Sierra is a tough act, but I am prepared to make a motion that the board ratify the Amicus Committee's decision to file a brief in support of Salt Lake City's position in this matter.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a first and a second. Is there any other discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
And thank you to all of you who were on this brief committee. I think all of you on the briefing committee, most of you all are attorneys anyway, and I know all of the staff we have working on that are too, and I trust your legal opinion, and we do stand with Salt Lake City on this. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, we have a first and a second on that. All in favor, say
Mayor
aye.
Caldwell, Mayor Caldwell, can I say one last thing?
Sure.
If you do vote to approve their recommendation, we will let stakeholders know that we're filing the amicus. That way we're being transparent and explain why we're doing it. So to try to mitigate some of the potential political fallout of their frustration with us. But at the end of the day, it's the right thing to do, and we'll try to keep the focus on the underlying legal issues and not on the inlet port itself.
Okay, thanks for that, Cam. Anybody else? Okay, we have a first and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Okay, hearing none, that certainly passes. Up next, we'll have number 8, Public Safety, Community Trust, and Love, Listen, and Lead. Cameron, I'll hand that off to you.
Terrific. Well, this is a critical issue, and it's fascinating to think that all of our meetings over the last few months have really been focused on COVID, and then overnight COVID was on the back burner because of this critical issue around community trust, racism, and our role as local government. Nick, will you pull up the PowerPoint? Over the last couple of weeks, since the tragic killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, the league staff, as well as the league officers, have had lots of conversations with different advocacy groups, community groups, stakeholders, state of Utah, and Chiefs Police Association, and others. Ultimately, it's our belief that it is critical for local government to lead out on this issue. Nick, we go to, let's see, do you have this slide up? Okay, perfect. Go back one slide. So before we jump into the love, listen, lead, I just want to set the context so that we're all in the same, so we're all at the same starting point. This comes down to three primary groups: people, policy, and politics. On the people side, you as elected officials have heard from your constituents who are frustrated and expect action. This certainly is not the first time that we've seen a tragic death, but it's a bigger moment than what we've seen in the past. We also employ more law enforcement officers than any other level of government. So it puts you in a very unique position to lead out on the issue. Ultimately, this really is bigger than law enforcement. This is really about government in general and opportunity in general. But law enforcement has the microscope currently. And I mentioned all the different stakeholders that are actively engaged over the last couple of weeks, some of which have been engaged for decades. Nick, can you, yeah. On the policy side, there are a slew of potential policy options. I'll talk about the chokeholds in a moment, but a slew of potential policy options. And as Chief Tom Ross and I and a few others met a little over a week ago, we realized that before we even got to the policies, we needed to make sure we had consensus on the principles and how we wanted to engage with all of the stakeholders. So today's conversation, other than the two bills this week, isn't going to be focused on the policy per se. It's to make sure we're on the same page about the principles of why and how we should engage. Then, of course, inevitably, you have the politics. And the politics are at the federal, state, local, and community levels. At the federal level, we've already seen House Democrats introduce legislation. Senate Republicans are working on their own legislation. At the state level, there are already more than 15 bills that have been open since Memorial Day, 2 of which for sure will be in special session this week, potentially others. The governor met with the Multicultural Affairs Commission and the Martin Luther King Jr. Commission a week and a half or so ago now, and had a very emotional and powerful meeting with them. And I included a link to one of the articles in the board packet for you, because the governor made some very powerful commitments. And what was telling for me as I watched the coverage of those meetings is that the individuals on the commission and the leaders in the commission said, Governor, we've had conversations before. What we're looking for is action. And the governor committed that this time would be different and there would be action potentially as soon as this week, and that he'd be bringing back recommendations in July. As we've talked to legislative leaders, there's a possibility of a special session later this summer and early fall around public safety, and then there will be additional action in the 2021 legislative session. Nick, we go to the next slide. The 2 bills that we know for sure that will be in special session this week are, first, a ban on chokeholds. And the first 4 bullet points address what we expect to be in that bill. The bill is not yet public, but it has been negotiated with a variety of stakeholders. I should mention too that you are all familiar with Chief Tom Ross, the police chief in Bountiful. And Chief Ross actually was the immediate past president of the police chiefs this year and was looking forward to stepping away from a leadership role in UCOPA until the current president announced he was retiring from his city. And at that point, Chief Ross, to his credit, recognized that this is a critical moment and he's the right man at the right time, and he agreed to step back in as president of the Police Chiefs Association for the rest of the year through March. So he and I have chatted regularly over the last week and a half, and the chiefs of police are supportive of this expected chokehold ban bill, and therefore it's our recommendation that we also support the bill. You can see that it would mean that training would no longer include chokeholds, and that a police officer may not restrain a person by using a chokehold and could face an aggravated assault charge if he or she did so. The other bill actually came to us from cities who were trying to address an issue that has arisen with individuals who may be exposed or may have COVID-19 and are threatening emergency service providers and first responders. And so this would allow for testing of those individuals with a warrant. So our recommendation is to support both bills. Now, that said, there are a variety of other bills that have been floated out there. I mentioned there are already more than 15 that have been bill files that have been opened. Those range from requiring every city to have a civilian advisory board to review potential officer misconduct or use of force or anything else. They also include changing the standards at Post, changing the membership of Post. Post is the statewide body that provides the training for peace officers. What we have been saying over the last few days, and this is what the officers instructed us to do last week, was to work on a process that would be principle-based, that would allow us to have some real, meaningful, and frankly uncomfortable conversations about whether or not some of these mechanisms are the right mechanisms to solve the problems and achieve the principles. So for example, Nick, go to the next slide. So for example, one principle of common ground for all the stakeholders ought to be community trust. You as elected officials want the community to trust your law enforcement officers and trust you. Residents right now are hurting, and trust has been broken in some communities, particularly in communities of color. So if we can all agree on the principle of community trust, then what mechanism helps to solve the problem of that broken trust and improves the trust? And so rather than jumping right now to the mechanism, let's focus first on the principles of common ground with an aggressive timetable to get to the most meaningful mechanisms. Thus, as we've gone through our internal process, our pillars of engagement with the legislature are respect, collaboration, and outcomes. And so what you'll see in the board packet, and Nick, you can switch back over to that strategic plan, is you can see that we've repurposed those pillars of respect, collaboration, and outcomes to love, listen, and lead, and use those as our principles, and really better put as our values as we engage in this process. And so as we love more and listen better, that will help us lead to get to meaningful action that will improve community trust, that will eradicate racism, and that will address the problems that we're seeing in our communities. So our strategic plan, as you can see, is the process to facilitate these discussions, having a task force of mayors, council members, administrators, attorneys, and police chiefs that would take these principles that ideally you would adopt today and then start putting these principles into action, starting with the love and the listen. Then we would communicate these principles to legislators, stakeholders, and the public. Before the meeting started, Mayor Silvestrini asked about the emails that he's been receiving from Black Lives Matter, and league staff's been receiving those emails as well. And when we go down in the plan, you'll see that one of the principles for your consideration comes right from Black Lives Matter, and it's about respecting every individual. So that's strategic plan D, and then E is participate in state task forces and use our principles. The legislature does plan to create a state work group that would aggressively work in the weeks and months to come to work through mechanisms. So we would have our internal task force that could vet the legal pieces, but also talk about the bigger issue of community trust, which is bigger than just a legal framework or policy framework. It's really more about hearts and minds and trust, and how do we help our members have those conversations with your constituents. So with that being said, Mayor Caldwell, what I'd like to do now is pause to see if there's a motion about what is in special session this week. And then we do have some invited guests that I'll introduce in a moment from the Multicultural Affairs Commission to talk about our plan and really start this process of Love, Listen, Lead. But before I introduce them, Meryl, I'll turn it back to you to see if there's any discussion about what we are expecting in special session this week.
Mayor Mendenhall.
Thanks. Cam, at the beginning or before we started the call, there were some other mayors asking about critique that the league is standing in the way of some of the progressive conversations that are coming ahead. Can you tell us what that's about, or what those comments may have been referring to? Yep.
So when we talked to the officers last week and we knew we had the board meeting today, there have been 15 plus different bills that are out there. And our response has been, we are supportive of uncomfortable conversations. We're supportive of looking at ways to improve law enforcement. We're supportive of our officers, and we're supportive of ensuring that every resident feels seen, heard, and supported. There's a space to do all of that. And so let's get to work to do all of that. Now, can you do all of that in a week? Our thought was that rather than jumping right to the mechanism of, for example, having a state requirement that every city have a civilian advisory board, that instead we should say, let's put that on the table with everything else, and let's have all the stakeholders there so we can talk through the pros and cons, and if that mechanism achieves the common ground principle. So it was never that we said no to the proposals. It was we said, rather than trying to do it all in a week, let's have a good process in place to work through those things. And we also said that based on the conversation with the officers, that we expected that our board would be very supportive of prohibiting chokeholds, and we were waiting to see what that language would be. And there was a meeting Friday afternoon about that, and then I was given the update this morning.
So Cameron, this is Jeff, if I can. I think you should come out with something. You know, I've been forwarded an email from Black Lives Matter that was sent to my constituent who contacted me, who said, you know, what's the league doing? What's Cameron doing specifically? You probably heard an earful, but I think it's important to clarify that, you know, the league is not opposing anything at this point. The league is saying, let's gather input. And I know that a number of us who have been kind of at the, you know, in the crucible on this, Aaron, you probably more than anybody, but I've had to tell a lot of people that that what I'm committed to is, you know, evaluating what our police policies are and listening to people and reforming those. And to launch out on things without doing the listening part, we won't be hearing everybody that way. You know, I mean, there's got to be a time, you know, a space for that, I guess, is what I'd like to say. And certainly we all want to move on this, and we want to do it quickly. And there are going to be some things that are easier to do than others, but there is an advantage in being deliberate here and figuring out what's better, what will work. You know, for example, I've been given a suggestion that, you know, in my city, we are considering an increase for police because our officer compensation is not adequate. And I don't think you can solve the things that we want to solve without attracting the right people to police work. So there are lots of pieces to this, but the league needs to come out with something that basically, you know, I don't want to spend the next week responding to emails about why the league is bad, right? I want to be involved in constructive discussions about this with my constituents and you know, with the other people that help control my police department. So that would help us with that. And then I think one of those messages is that, you know, we are listening, but, you know, in order for everybody to be heard, that it's important that we do a good job of listening before we launch into policy reforms, I think. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Mayor
Caldwell, can I quickly respond to what Mayor Silvestrini said?
Sure.
So I wholeheartedly agree. So you'll see in the strategic plan that's on the screen that letter D is the communication about principles to legislators, stakeholders, and the public. So the officers have been working on an op-ed. That would be a joint op-ed between the league and chiefs of police. So that goes through the outline that you have here in front of you. And I agree. But once you as a board give us direction, then we can aggressively act on that direction. Our concern as staff was getting out in front of the elected officials when we knew we had a board meeting today.
And we could do some of that as quickly as today, right, Cameron? Did you hear what I said, Cameron? Yeah.
Yep.
Mayor Caldwell?
Go ahead.
I think it's also it's important to be communicating what we are doing in the short term, in the immediate sense, which isn't to say we don't know what we're going to do yet because we haven't listened. You know, it's not like that. There's engagement that's happening now, the listening more and learning. Those are actual steps that I believe the board is or the staff is taking on our behalf. So talking about what is happening in the short term so that it's more obvious what the path is that the league sees to the long-term actions or the potential long-term actions. I think the way of talking about that will help in people understanding that it's not just about waiting and listening.
This is Matt Durham from Holiday, and I think building off what Mayor Mendenhall just said, I think there's some understandable skepticism about process and commissions and task forces and things like that being a way of kind of slowing down change. And I think we just need to be really careful that that's not the perception that comes out in connection with our communications, that we're identifying ways that we're really trying to move things forward, and that I agree that it's really important to listen, but I think there's some suspicion that setting up process for listening is a way to just kind of slow things down.
Mayor Caldwell, can I just ask a quick question?
Yeah, please do.
So, I mean, is there something as specific as, like the idea has already been mentioned about disallowing chokeholds? Is there something that specific that we could come out with even today and say, yes, we are opposed to those, and in fact, I would think most of our cities, maybe not most, but some of our cities already forbid those. But could we take that kind of action even today to say we are opposed to those? Those should be, banned as soon as possible by the state, by the cities, whatever. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here to send a strong message that there's something we can, I hope, all agree on immediately. Just a thought.
Mayor Caldwell.
Go ahead.
This is Mayor Harvey. Something that I struggle with is I don't think it's just listening. I don't think there's any of us that if we truly felt there was a problem that we would fail to act. I see the biggest problem is that we just don't have good data. And so I think one of the things that we really need to do along with the state is figure out what's actually happening and getting good analyzed data. And so I don't think, listening is just patting somebody on the head and saying, I hear you, but we need good data. We need good research to find out what's actually going on. And then we can try and come up with solutions to it.
So Mayor Caldwell, Nick has pulled up the lead portion of our proposed principles, and based on the feedback I'm hearing here is we ought to add letter G, which would be, if you take a motion specifically on chokeholds, prohibit chokeholds. Letter H would be to ensure sufficient data to help drive good decisions. So we could add those to the list of principles here that we would work into the communication and the letters that we'll be sending to state leaders and other stakeholders.
What about body cameras as an area for cities to, be in dialogue with the legislature about funding? I don't know what the status of body cameras are in your departments, but I think that's another critical piece of the transparency of policing that is totally reasonable. And I know our officers really love having the body camera footage because most of the time it tells the story from a different perspective. But that's
Can I add something to the body camera discussion as well? As I agree with that, and South Jordan agrees with that. One thing we do have a concern about is a proposal to make it a criminal offense if there's not body camera footage. If for some reason something happened very quickly and it wasn't turned on, if something happened, having our officers face criminal offense for not having body camera footage is something that we are concerned about. So as that conversation continues to roll out, that's one thing we want to.
Did they call that the presumption of guilt in prior bills? There was a presumption that they were guilty in prior bills. We'd be very much against that as well in Ogden.
Well, Mayor's Caldwell and Ramsey, I think this is a perfect example of where let's get consensus on the principles and then start working through the mechanisms. Mayor Mendenhall, I was the lead negotiator for the league on the body cam bill 4 years ago. Mayor Ramsey's attorney, Ryan Luce, was one of the lead negotiators. Mark Cottrell from your city was one of the lead negotiators. And so the good news is we have a lot of in-house experts. Gary Williams from Ogden was involved, who we can snap our fingers and have at the table to start working through those legal and policy pieces. But if you think that principle A about transparency, it could be broad and say be transparent about what cities do, particularly police departments. Great. What I'm hoping for today is that we have consensus around what we want to accomplish in these principles, and then we start building the mechanisms and start working through what mechanisms actually help get us there. And the chokehold one specifically, Mayor Pike, I think it would be great to have a motion to aggressively support that bill.
Is that a motion you'd like to make?
Yes, and the bill as currently defined does give exception for if the life of the officer is at stake. Is that correct, Cameron?
What the bill does is it says that a chokehold cannot be used for restraint. So it cannot be used proactively by an officer to restrain an individual. So that's the focus. So there's really not a need for the self-defense provision because anybody can use, like if I was being assaulted, I could use anything to defend myself. What the focus is when a police officer under the color of law, can the police officer use it to restrain an individual? And going forward, the answer would be unequivocally no.
So if it's in order, I would make a motion supporting that bill. I can't remember whose it was. Was it Thatcher's or?
It'll be Representative Sandra Hollins.
Okay. I make that motion that we as a league support that or that legislation.
I'll second.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion?
Mayor Caldwell, this is Jewel Allen.
Go ahead, Jewel.
I don't have any more to add. I just wanted to offer if there's a task force to be formed, I'd love to serve on it.
Thank you for that. Any other comments or discussion? Okay, we have a first and a second to support the ban on chokehold bill. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Sounds like that is unanimous. And Cameron, one thing I took out of your comments was that you can snap your fingers and have Gary Williams and a bunch of others get around the table immediately. I need to know what your secret is because I can't do that with my state staff. So I appreciate
so
that.
much. It's
And I
down my
understand-
fingers. It's been a week and a half of effort to try to get everybody's schedules aligned, and so we'll get it going.
Well, and I've appreciated your reaching out with the Chiefs of Police Association. There's a lot of misinformation floating right now. I appreciate the positions you are all in with these emotional issues. And sometimes I think it is important to be a little patient and measure twice and cut once with some of these. And so I think everybody on this call is feeling a lot of the same pressure, and we've all seen a lot of the same emails, and just have appreciated the league's leadership and willingness to jump in and create dialogue for a lot of the different interested parties. So I've been very impressed with that, and I appreciate what you all are doing.
Well, thank you, Mayor. And before you ask for a motion on love, listen, lead, and conversation, if we've got the right principles and the right balance here, let's, if it's all right, turn the time over to our guests from the Multicultural Affairs Commission. Does that work with you, Mayor Caldwell?
Yes, please.
Perfect. Well, I want to introduce three speakers for the next 10 to 15 minutes or so who have been in touch with league staff, not just in the last couple of weeks, but over the last couple of months, as we've talked about the impact of COVID-19 on communities of color and other underrepresented areas around the state. And so because of those conversations, I was able to invite them to join us for this conversation today, and I appreciate their willingness to join. So we have Nubia Pena. She is the director of the Division of Multicultural Affairs for the state of Utah. We have Byron Russell, who is the co-chair of the Utah Multicultural Affairs Commission, and Zeman Zhao, who is the director of the Mayor's Office for New Americans in Salt Lake County. And Byron, I'm going to steal your thunder and just let everybody know that you are not the former Jazz basketball player Brian Russell. That's how Byron and I first met almost a decade ago. We sat down and I asked him how many times he was confused for Brian Russell back in the day, and he regaled me with some great stories. So Nubia, Byron, thank you for joining us. Nubia, I'll turn the time over to you for the next 10 to 15 minutes. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you so very much, Cameron. It is a pleasure to join you. And I do know that Byron wanted to begin with a few comments. So while I share our screen, is it okay if I share the screen, Cameron? Is that permission?
Nick, will you let her share the screen?
Yep, she should be all set.
Excellent. Thank you. Go ahead, Byron.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. It's an honor to be with you today. And one of the stories that I did tell Cameron, that between Brian Russell and myself, I'm still here and he's gone. So I think I need to say a little more than that. But this has been a very interesting moment to share and to listen to you discuss some of the most difficult things that I think are challenges that have been not just the last 2 weeks or the last 3 weeks or the last 3 years, but for quite some time. And as my co-chair, Zeman Zhao, and our director, Nubia Pena, and I were appointed by the state to lead the COVID-19 multicultural subcommittee, we were very aware of some of these systemic issues in what we call the social determinants of health. And those were mostly academic in some people's eyes. But obviously, we began to see, especially with COVID, how minority communities were disparate, were essentially being impacted a little bit more, a lot more than others. 14% of the state is Hispanic, and over nearly 40% are impacted. And so the governor actually did create this task force to be more of a resource. And as we face some of the other bigger issues and some of the systemic changes, one of our committee members, Dr. Babbitts, basically put it down to the fact that healthcare and education were an amazingly important and poignant moment for us to reflect where we put our resources. But I think that we are very aware of the issues that are at hand, and they are being decided upon with a lot more urgency. And we feel that this moment between COVID and some of the issues that you just voted on provide us an opportunity like we've never had before to have people listen and to have people hear what's happening in our city. And so with that, I will ask Nubia if she'll go through our presentation here to give you some insight on the work that we've been doing.
Absolutely, Byron. Thank you so very much. And thank you to everyone who's on this call. It was really helpful to hear some of the thoughts, concerns, and also the direction in which the league is moving, to understand the impact that these conversations are having and have had generationally for our hardest hit communities, not only for COVID-19, but as we're looking for some structural change as the way that we do and navigate this work. So as a brief introduction to the Utah Division of Multicultural Affairs, our mission is to promote an inclusive climate for Utah's multicultural communities. And our vision is to be a model state by ensuring equitable resources and services to all who call Utah home. I was recently appointed in July of 2019 as director, so I haven't reached my 1 year. And I really feel privileged that I've been able to serve in this capacity with an exceptional team, but especially a valued partnership with Byron and Z on the subcommittee. So I want to provide some context because I also noticed that on this call, data matters. And so the data that we collected from a joint report, which I'll share here in just a moment, was what led to the subcommittee being formed. So we sought to establish a baseline of immediate needs and unique barriers that were faced by disenfranchised populations during the outbreak to better inform our state leaders of the growing gaps and to solve these concerns together. So with the support of our two different commissions, the Multicultural Commission, which is co-chaired by Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox and Byron Russell, and the Martin Luther King Jr. Human Rights Commission, which is chaired by Ms. Emma Houston, our division prepared a survey for service providers and first responders working directly with vulnerable and systematically marginalized communities. And what we found through the qualitative data collected, can you see this okay? Yes, sorry. The qualitative data collected highlighted the lived experience of our underserved constituents, and it allowed us to understand the complex and intersectional crises that many people were enduring. But it is critical to note that these were pre-existing needs that our communities were experiencing long before the pandemic, right? This is the conversation of the social determinants of health. However, the severity of the crisis has been magnified, amplified, and compounded, and the iniquities have created a greater lack and devastating outcomes. So the data that was collected was coded on key words, phrases, and ideas that emerged from each question. And these codes allowed us to cluster the data based on commonalities and significant topics. So in 1 week, we were able to create the local needs among multicultural communities during the COVID-19 pandemic report. And the overarching themes that we found were physiological and safety needs, language and literacy accessibility, coordinated dissemination of information was missing in the way that communities were receiving the content around the guidelines, around best practices, around prevention of COVID-19, and that there was also a lack of culturally mindful and inclusive approaches in messaging as well as outreach. There was also a lack of inclusive and diverse representation and perspectives, and that there was a critical need to address systemic inequities that were continuing to compound. So the sections that we outlined were really gathered after we had a after we were able to compile the narratives that were consistently showing up. And so those sections outlined the unique barriers faced by marginalized communities. And 75% noted that access to computers and technology was a huge barrier. Not having access to these resources created a gap for many to be informed about important updates and directives that were quickly changing or to be able to stay connected due to social distancing restrictions. This has also widened the digital divide and impacted the way that our youth access their education, causing many to fall behind. 74% of participants noted food insecurity as a concern as households navigate social panic buying, limited inventories, and increased demands at food pantries and unaffordable food options.
Unlike some Utahns who are stockpiling food items before and in the midst of the pandemic, this presents a significant financial challenge for communities with restricted resources as they purchase only what they can on a limited basis. 67% of respondents noted misinformation as a significant barrier faced by those that they serve. Lack of accurate information can fuel greater inaccuracies and cause additional fear within our communities. Participants shared that this occurred around questions regarding immigration enforcement, deportation, access to medical services, and how seriously to treat executive orders. So even though our state is now moving in a direction where we are lessening our restrictions, communities of color continue to have to operate at higher restrictions because they have higher risks of being COVID-19 positive. They also have higher risks of not necessarily having best practices to support them because maybe they don't know where to access resources or support and services. So again, this is incredibly important as you are each engaging with your communities and hearing what they're asking for. The communication piece is really important. So the other piece I wanted to mention was the housing insecurity. So concerns around rent payment and housing costs are on the rise. There are also concerns around staying home if the home is not a safe space due to violence or abuse increasing widely in our state. Many of you have seen that there's been an increase of domestic violence in different areas of our community. And those also without health insurance or full knowledge of available resources face uncertainty when it comes to testing and treatment. Language barriers is also a huge gap for our communities who are limited English proficient and non-English speaking populations. They are navigating revolving news and resources through predominantly English-only mediums, and the lack of access to translated information from reliable sources is a prominent concern. In addition, the delay of language accessible information has been causing fear and misinformation for that to increase. Individuals who are undocumented fear getting testing and receiving treatment for COVID-19 and other health needs because the fear of negative legal repercussions exists within this community. So I just wanted to just highlight a couple of these things that are coming up and continue to come up as we're navigating COVID-19 and the pandemic, and how our hardest hit communities really oftentimes have been marginalized and live in shadows, right? Like they're afraid to come out and to maybe say these are the things. And so that's why this survey was incredibly important. And so one of the primary recommendations that we made was to create a multicultural subcommittee that focused on the growing disparities in order to centralize and amplify the voices of those often silenced. So at this point, I'd love to have Byron talk a little bit about the makeup of the group and how we are working to close the gaps that we've identified are hardest, are really creating additional challenges for our communities.
Thank you, Nubia. And it was very important for us to know that as a resource that we would have to have direct contact with the COVID task force. So we are part of the org chart and we report directly to incident command, and we are very much a part of the conversation and filling those gaps. And so if you go to the next slide, you'll see that the multicultural subcommittee was actually created through some of the survey. The next slide shows, if you can, Nick, move to that, thank you. The subcommittee, based upon the survey, it turned around pretty quickly with 93 members of our community and leaders who identified those statistics and concerns that Nubia mentioned. And with that, if you go to the next slide, you'll see the members of our commission, our subcommittee, include members of state government. They include members of our multicultural communities, faith-based organizations, financial institutions. If you go to the next slide, you'll see members of our Health Disparities Department, Ms. Emma Houston with the MLK Commission, Mike Haddon, who's done an amazing job, as well as Jake Fatimitsu, and Derek Jensen, the Native American Communities. And as you go down the list, you'll see some partners such as Comcast, Intermountain Healthcare, in our corporate community. And so we felt that it was extremely important to make sure that all of these gaps were being filled by these very talented folks. And so one thing that I would like to ask of this group is, when we started to do our work, we really didn't have any money. So we have been contacted by GOMB. They've asked us for how much we wanted, and of course what we wanted and what we're getting might be two different things. But as Mayor Mendenhall had mentioned earlier about the need to get certain funds out through the state's resources to meet people who can't afford to pay rent or having other struggles and problems as our economy is still affecting them adversely, we actually do have what we call a resource partner coalition. And that resource partner coalition, beyond our subcommittee, who have amazing working groups and actually work with us regularly, are organizations that are doing extremely well at serving the community to actually address some of these very specific needs. And so we have asked the state for over $1 million, and that fund will actually go, some of those funds will go to translation, some of it will go to digital divide needs, but a lot of it will go to grants. And through the Department of Heritage and Arts, we will have a portal set up for some organizations that are meeting certain criteria to fill those gaps as well. And so if you look at this resource partner coalition, I'm sure some of you as mayors throughout the state are thinking this is very Salt Lake centric. Two things. One is we would love for you to be able to see this, to register maybe where you see the need, but also where you see that there are not those throughout the state, specifically in Washington County and other parts of the state, which are finding huge spikes, and that is also very much adversely addressing our minority communities. And so we would love your input as to organizations that do actually reach the members of the community. These are organizations that have been doing for years as part of their mission to reach unique members of our community who are not able to, because of maybe lack of trust or lack of resource or lack of ability or lack of understanding to be able to apply for these grants. And so with that, we would really appreciate your input to Cameron and others, and we would love to add those individuals to our list with a formal request from the state to join us and to be a partner in this reception of funds, receiving of funds. And so with that, I'll now ask Zeman Zhao to talk about our purpose.
Hey, thank you everyone, and thanks for having us join this important meeting. So the purpose of the Multicultural Subcommittee of the COVID-19 Task Force is really to work collaboratively with existing frameworks to amplify efforts and alleviate growing disparities faced by marginalized and underrepresented communities. I want to go back and chime into a comment that Mayor Silvestrini mentioned earlier, and that comment was that the people on the grounds really knows the solutions to addressing the problems, and that as we move forward as a multicultural subcommittee, with many of us in the Wasatch Front, we really need to acknowledge what is happening in the grounds and work with them on addressing those issues. And so that was really central to how the Multicultural Commission is being organized. And we aim to work towards long and short-term goals that will begin to address the existing challenges the pandemic had compounded through the both practical efforts and policy initiatives, thinking it through how do we address the immediate needs that is out there, but also thinking through the policy initiatives to help us move forward and pivot towards a more equitable community. Next slide, please. So our charge. Thank you, Nubia. Our charge of the subcommittee, going back to what I mentioned earlier, is to elevate best practices inspired by individuals and collective achievements. We know that best practices is been happening all over. We want to be able to gather those best practices, whether that is in Washington County or in Wasatch County, and be able to share those practices statewide. When we coordinate infrastructures in individuals and groups to work together statewide. And one of the missing challenges that we've seen with the survey is information getting out to the community in a coordinated way. When we release information in the state level, how is this community trickling down, this information trickling down to the rural areas as well as the urban areas, is when we translate information, is that being accessed by everyone in the state. So the coordination piece is really important. Connect state and private resources to the communities. We also acknowledge that as a government agency and as a state, we cannot address all of the issues. There are limitations. So getting the private sector involved in helping us identify ways that they can help is important. And I think that Byron is going to mention some of those connections that we have made and how we can move forward. And lastly, is to accelerate existing resources to program for greater impact. And again, that really goes back to what we talked about earlier. How can we work together to accelerate things that are working and is making an impact in the community? Next slide, please. So we have key deliverables, making sure that we could capture what the impacts are. Increase language access information through translation, interpretation, and literacy skill considerations is number one. Since the pandemic, the state of Utah has begun to translate a lot of the material in different languages. To be truthful, we're still playing catch up, but we're doing such a better job now in making sure that all residents are getting the information. One thing that we recognize with this pandemic is that it doesn't, this virus doesn't care if you speak English or a different language. If you are not getting the information, it's affecting everyone. So we want to make sure that information are being shared and is accessible by all. Assist in the coordination and dissemination of information through non-traditional channels or mass access. And we'll have a video to share with you on how we are doing that. And we would love to get your input on how we can do this and expand it and be a resource to you. Increase service engagement in underserved communities to address essential needs, such as food, housing, and social services. Again, recognizing that the needs are very different across regions, we want to be really mindful on those practices and how we can increase service engagement in those communities. Amplify and elevate the efforts community advocates are already engaged in, including grassroots initiative. And that's why it was so important for us that we advocate for funding that goes directly into those communities. I know that Cameron and the community has worked really well in getting dollars for census to go to those community organizations. And I think that is really a best practice, is make sure that the money does go to the communities who's being affected the most. And we want to do the same with our ask for funding from the CARES Act. And finally, establish a practice of transparency in subcommittee efforts to increase trust within the underrepresented communities. And I think this is something that you guys have discussed before, just prior to our presentation. It's really important for us to create a trust and transparency so that we are engaging the whole entire community in the conversation. Next slide, please. Long-term influence state and local efforts that address pre-existing disparities that are caused by the social determinant of health. And I think that's really important because as we recover from this pandemic, we want to make sure that we are a better community and more prepared for future. Influence policy initiative that prioritize equitable distribution of state and local resources. Developing a language access plan and build the capacity in Utah's workforce to work with diverse communities through diversity, equity, and inclusion training. And this is something that we're also partnering with the Multicultural Commission as well as the MLK Human Rights Commission to provide trainings both in state government as well as in local communities. And I'll conclude it and turn it back to Nubia.
Actually, Byron, go right ahead and talk about the strategy work groups and some of the things that we've been doing.
Indeed. Well, reflective of the survey and some of the focuses that we have chairs of food security, social services and housing, language accessible information, communications, digital divide, economic sustainability, and health access. These are very vigorous groups committees who include others other than those on the subcommittee. And we're finding some real great traction with that. And we're trying to coordinate with our legislators and others who are working on issues that reflect some of these concerns as well. And as far as activities go, I will in a minute ask to share with you our PSA, which I think you will appreciate. And Cameron or Nick will do the short version in the interest of time. And the healthcare partnerships are extraordinarily essential because on the ground, there are moments when healthcare organizations like Intermountain is trying to find ways to fill the gap to make sure they're reaching our communities, and how they reach them has a lot to do with the voices that are calling out to seek their needs. We are obviously working with state agencies to increase access for multicultural communities, and we're closing those gaps with state agencies and CBOs and advocating for funding and support for CBOs, as we had mentioned earlier. And if we could run our PSA this moment.
Yep, as Nick pulls up the short version, you can see board members why we invited the commission to come to give you this overview of the type of work that they're currently doing to try to build community trust. So when I said a moment ago that the current issues around law enforcement are under the microscope, but really we've got a bigger conversation to be had around community trust, this is a good starting point for that. So Nick, I'll let you play the short version.
I think we need some sound, if possible.
And we're happy to also circulate this link so that maybe if you're interested in sharing it out, that would also be another way. For whatever reason, there might be some technical difficulties. But one of the things with the PSAs and the communications team is that we wanted to also make sure that instead of this being one and done, that this really is the way that we're encouraging state leadership to think through how are we reaching and communicating with our diverse communities? Are they being reflected in the messaging? If we recognize that there's diverse thought, diverse faiths, that our communities are going to rely heavily on their faith leaders, then have we maybe consider utilizing them as a partner in sharing a clear message that COVID-19 is affecting communities of color more deeply and more more, right? So while we try to figure out the technical part, are there any questions from members on this call? Is there anything that we can ask or answer or clarify? Is there anything that we can maybe further discuss as it relates to the efforts and initiatives of this work group?
And
muted myself. I don't know if you can see my hand up.
Oh, hi.
Hi, this is Mayor Emily Niehaus. Thank you so much for this work. We have so much work to do. I just wanted to offer an important reminder for a lens of, in particular, work in rural Utah, that it's kind of a double whammy. And I just see it every day here in Moab. And so I didn't really see any specific rural group or, and maybe that's because rural is a lens that, we'll put on, but I just wanted to, speak up for rural individuals.
Well, Mayor Newhouse, you're getting yourself into another gamble here, because Mayor Newhouse really helped us with some census grant outreaches. And we're actually modeling this around the same way that you were able to bring a greater insight into some rural participation in the census grants. So we're going to do the same process where we're going to ask you and others throughout the state to help us do exactly what you just asked us. We recognize that this is very Salt Lake centric, very Salt Lake County centric, and with a little, sort of couple of joiners. But we really do have a limitation to our reach, and all of you are those connectors. And so when Cameron offered us this opportunity, we thought the value add for you was the fact that we could come to you and ask for you to point out those groups so that we can help resource them. So as we put together this grant group, now you're a little busy, Mayor Newhouse, as if you weren't before. So I don't think I'm going to ask you to read 110 grants, but we will need your help to tell us who and which organizations are in need.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So can we start our PSA with some sound?
Okay, unfortunately, it doesn't seem like it's going to work. So maybe what we can do is we can just share out the links. And this is one of many that we hope to develop, but we are seeking to do one in Spanish. We're seeking to do another one with multicultural leaders. Again, recognizing that the COVID-19 confirmed cases have very clearly shown that racially and ethnically diverse communities have been hardest hit. We're trying to be really intentional. We also recognize, as was just mentioned, that our communities in rural counties, rural areas, there is a very unique approach that we need to take, and we want to be mindful. And so we will, if possible, reach out to you for suggestions, best practices on how we ensure that our communities are not being left out, and that this is not just Salt Lake County, Salt Lake City based, but in fact really reaching to the four corners of the state, because we hope to serve everyone that's been hard hit by this.
Great, and with that, if there are any other questions or thoughts, we will send around the PSA. It's very powerful, and I think
the
it's
coronavirus.
Oh, there we are.
This is hitting our communities hard.
But we can do something about it.
Wash your hands.
Wear a mask when you're out in public.
We invite you to maintain social distancing.
That means no hugs or handshakes.
Let's especially show our love and respect for our elderly. Do it for your family.
Do it for your community.
Let's do it together.
Because together we are stronger.
So that's a 30-second clip, but we do have a 2-minute one that goes a little bit more into preventative practices around COVID-19. The same script will be used as it relates to our multicultural leaders in the state of Utah, and it's being mindful not only of BIPOC, but as well as LGBTQ, and how, again, are we really thinking through a larger version of who Utah is and what we represent. So we are receptive in all ways to being inclusive and mindful of voices that may be left out. Some of the work that we're also focused on is policy-based, so we're hoping to influence the way that things are being translated. The content itself cannot just be a direct translation. We have to be mindful of those who have literacy concerns, those who might be who need 3rd to 5th grade reading level. Things need to be in plain language. So more than just creating, I would say, something that, the deliverables that are tangible, we're hoping to influence culture. So please let us know how we can better serve, how we can better partner. And also, if you think that there's something else we should be doing, we're absolutely open to this.
Great, and I would just end if C has something to say as well. And I think the whole point here is that we are a statewide commission, and I have to just be front and sort of honest that we live here in Salt Lake City, and sometimes we don't hear these diverse voices, these rural communities, and places beyond us. So we really would love your participation, and I know that we would love to make sure that your thoughts are elevated, policies are created to adjust to those concerns that you might have. But with that, Cameron, thank you very much for this opportunity.
I'm going to...
Well, thank you to the three of you, and Mayor Pike, go ahead.
I was going to say, Mayor Caldwell had to leave the meeting, and so he asked me if I would see, I do get my chance after all, everybody, but if I would kind of take charge of the rest of the meeting. Thank you, Nubia, Byron, and Z. We appreciate this very much, and representing St. George, I would definitely like to visit with you as well. I appreciate you making reference to Washington County, and frankly, I could use your help. I won't speak for Mayor Wilson Edwards of Cedar City, but I'll bet we could use your help in the Southwest Utah area as well. So thank you for this, and we'll be reaching out.
Thank you.
Sir. And what we've also done is we've centralized a lot of content in multiple languages. So if that would be helpful, we'd be happy to share that out so that it can then be distributed by your community-based organizations that are deeply trusted. We're also making sure that any resource that would be able to help our communities understand what their rights are in their workspaces, or what they can do if they have concerns around healthcare access. So those are the things we'd love to get into your hands so that we can vastly distribute. So thank you. Happy to see.
Thank you so much. Board, I'm going to take us back to the issue of love, listen, and lead. As Cameron mentioned, and Mayor Caldwell, staff would like us to have to make a motion to support the general concepts that have been presented today of love, listen, and lead. Sorry. Any questions on that? Is someone ready to make a motion along those lines?
I'd like to make a motion.
I'll second, but I have a question first, if I may.
Okay, so a motion by Jewel and a second by Mayor Bierman. Go ahead, Mayor.
And my question's mostly to Cameron and Victoria. Cam, you had mentioned earlier that this might be coming back in a special session, some statewide changes.
Yes, so there will be the special session this week, and then the governor will be working with the Multicultural Affairs Commission to bring back other recommendations, not just about law enforcement, but about housing and healthcare, access to health. That was in part why we wanted to take a few minutes today to listen to the presentation from the commission, so that you got a sense that really this overall conversation about community trust is bigger than just law enforcement. And so we expect the governor to come back with some recommendations this summer. The legislature is looking at law enforcement specifically, but we expect them to look at some of these other bigger issues. And so the love, listen, lead approach would be both for the law enforcement conversation, but the bigger conversation about community trust and community partnerships. I do expect there to be a special session essentially every month for the rest of the year because of COVID, and I expect these conversations about equity to be part of it.
Okay, I just wanted to suggest, I mean, this is something that I think every elected official on this call today is spending unprecedented time talking to their police and their HR departments and that, trying to find out what our policies are and what areas we can do better. And it's quite a patchwork. And I think it's just a great way the league can act as a resource and find areas of commonality to be consistent here. So I want to make sure if something's coming up that we have a way to really pull together some ideas so we can be proactive here. I think it's a great opportunity.
Thank you, Mayor. Any other comments on the motion?
Mayor Pike, what I'll add to Mayor Bierman's question is that part of the plan, Nick, can you pull back up the plan? Okay. Part of the plan, if you go up to the top, Nick, in the strategic plan piece, is you can see in the part A, you have little I, which is the task force, but the little double I is how do we facilitate communication and provide resources on these general topics. So today would be a very small baby step toward that objective. But Mayor Bierman, you're absolutely right. If it's what you as a board want us to do, we will prioritize that in our bandwidth to be the facilitator for this type of communication.
I would recommend that, and I would add that to the motion if we can.
Jewel, are you okay with kind of amending the motion to that effect?
Yes, that's fine. That's
okay.
Great.
And obviously, Mayor Bierman, you're willing to have that amendment. So any other questions?
Mayor Pike?
Yes, sir.
Don Christensen from West Valley. I would just caution us as we go through this that we take a good look at things as they are and as they need to be, and not just do a quick knee-jerk reaction. And it looks in the outline like we're going to do that. We're going to take some time and really evaluate it. But a knee-jerk reaction would get us in more trouble than we already are. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. I think that's kind of one of the points that Cameron made earlier as well, verbally. So thank you very much, Don, for the clarification. Any other comments? Just looking on the chat. I don't see anything there. Okay, then all in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously from what I can tell. And Cameron, I guess we're going to go back to, let's see, other legislative interim priorities and engagement. Are you leading that, or is Victoria?
Victoria is, and before I turn it over to her, Nick added, just so everybody's clear on the motion, he added those additional bullet points that Mayor Mendenhall and Mayor Harvey had brought up. So that was part of your motion, were those additional bullet points. And we also welcome any board members who want to be involved with the task force piece. Gary Hill has been working with the City Managers Association, looking for some of our best people there. We've been working with the Municipal Attorneys Association to get their best people. And then Chief Ross has identified some of his best people within the Police Chiefs Association. We've identified internally a handful of elected officials. If any of you want to participate, Joel, you pointed that out earlier, shoot me a message, because our goal is to get this task force up and running by next week after the special session to get to work and like I said, have some uncomfortable conversations about how we can do better on the overall issue of community trust, both with law enforcement and beyond. So feel free to shoot me a message. And if you're curious if somebody from your city is already participating, you can ask me and I'll let you know if a manager or a police chief or someone's participating.
Thank you, Cameron.
So with that, Mayor Pike, my request is that we, instead of ending at 2, we end at 2:10 and give Victoria 15 minutes, and then the remaining items can all be done in 10 minutes. Does that work? Does that work for you?
Yes, and I think, if someone had to drop off, I believe our action items are probably complete. Is that correct?
We do have a couple more action items, so that's why we'll go quickly here. And thank you to our guests, Nubia, Byron, and Z. Thank you very much for joining us. And you're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, and then I'll circle back with you afterward as well.
Thank you so much, Cameron. I did just want to mention that I did just put in the chat box a link to a recording so that people who are interested in navigating conversations about race and justice in our society, they provide a couple of next best steps. This recording is only available until 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday, June 17th, but it's from the American Negotiation Institute. So I hope that this is a helpful resource, and I just wanted to make sure that you all had access to it. Also want to make sure that you know that our division is currently developing a few trainings to build capacity for Utah's workforce as it relates to doing racial equity work. So once we have those available, we'd be happy to send those, share those, and possibly convene a more in-depth conversation with you all if you're interested in some of the offerings of our division. But we stand at the ready to support you, and we thank you for your leadership. We know how hard right now the time is for what you've been asked to do in not only leading, but healing such hurt in the community that has been deeply embedded in the way that we do business. And I'm just grateful for all of you. So I just wanted to say thank you on our behalf. So thank you.
Thank you, Nubia. Victoria, let's go to number 9.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as many of you know, we're looking at a special session this week. Just real quick, we're expecting to do presentations in Rev and Tax and also political subdivisions. We'll also be doing public input in the Law Enforcement Committee. Special session bills, we're looking to see some law enforcement bills likely. We've also been working on an open and public meetings bill to allow a public body to hold an electronic meeting without an anchor location if the anchor location is a threat to health and safety. So we're working on that. As far as we know, the bill that was up in April and failed that would curb your emergency authority is not coming back. However, John Hiskey listened into the Economic Development Interim meeting this morning. Apparently there were some rumblings about a bill on the Emergency Management Act and authority in there, and some draconian local government action. So stay tuned and we'll see what we can find out about that. We are not expecting a bill on PIDs. That was something that had been sent to you from the PRC as a request to work on special session. Right now, we don't expect to see a PIDs bill during special session, but never underestimate the legislature. So stay tuned to that. I'm just going to share my screen here with this presentation as we as the legislative team try to transition from COVID at some point, hopefully, to our other many duties. We're trying to find a way to make sure that we are prioritizing all these issues appropriately. And so we've come up with a system that we're looking for feedback from you and also a ratification of how we have prioritized the issues we've looked at. So our objective was to create a mechanism for staff and board prioritization of ULCT advocacy resources. As you can see just from our agenda today, there are a lot of things coming our way at the League, and we want to make sure we're focusing on the right things, giving due attention to other things, and maybe not worrying so much about some of the other things with our limited resources. So we came up with this tier mechanism, and the idea is that staff would assign the issues to the tiers and engage appropriately, and then the board would review tiers and sift through the issues. So tier 1 would be our highest priority. These are issues where the policy has direct and measurable or significant impact on local control and or revenue, or the politics require our immediate attention. Tier 1 issues would require full investment of ULCT staff resources. The second tier would be a policy that has a substantial impact on local control and or revenue, where the politics require our ready attention. So this is a medium investment of ULCT resources. The third tier, the policy has minimal impact on local control and or revenue. The policy concern is principle-based and or is localized in its impact, or the politics require minimal attention or are not pressing. Minimal investment would be made on tier 3 issues. And this is just another reiteration of how the tiers would apply. A tier 1 issue is where ULCT is probably getting, knee deep into the policy on behalf of our partners and with our members. Tier 2, we would be assisting probably with some policy creation, and we'd also engage in the final ratification. A tier 3 issue is probably one where we signify what ULCT's support or opposition would be in some cases, but there isn't quite as much staff engagement in the policy creation side of it. So in order to deploy these tiers that we're proposing, the Ledge team will assign the issues to tiers as they come in to our attention. We'll present issues and recommended tiers for your ratification. The board will set and adjust tiers assignment as needed. We don't necessarily think this will be every board meeting, but as new information comes and new priorities rise, we will ask for you to review them. And you'll see the last bullet here is we will inform the LPC members of the tiers once on them, and the LPC may make recommendations to the board, but it's really up to the board to decide where each issue fits within these tiers. And then as we look at the issues, our Ledge team will meet to evaluate our ongoing priorities and whether we're spending the right amount of time on an issue just based on how it is prioritized. And we'll evaluate our time and whether we need to readjust our resources. So you have in your packet what we are proposing today with the issues that have come to our attention. Some of these are ongoing issues from last year. Some of them are issues that came up during session. Some of them are issues that have come up in the last 2 months. We've put them into these tiers, and we'll be asking you to ratify or let us know if we need to make adjustments to this table because you feel like something should not be a high, tight tier 1 priority, or something needs to change from tier 2 to tier 3 or come off on hold. You'll see, I won't go through all of these, but I'll go through tier 1 and 2. Tier 1, we have the CARES Act funding, water conservation, PIDs, HB 374, which many of our cities are working on the reporting on their inspection timing, and then public safety and race. Tier 2 is gravel pits, inland port, Amicus, the metro townships, transition to cities, anything that's coming up with the land use task force. Right now, we're probably looking at impact fees, training and review standards, EMS issues, transportation utility fee, and justice courts. Based on those issues, the working groups that we see coming forward, and you've already heard about some of these, where we as Ledge team and ULCT staff will be investing our time, but also reaching out to some of our extended family, our PIDs, gravel pits, land use task force, public safety, water efficiency, metro townships, the transportation utility fee, and annexation. And then, this is just to let you know, this is what we anticipate for LPC meetings. We're going to have one next Monday where we will go through this tier process and show the issues as we've prioritized them with your ratification and some other issues. And any questions?
Anybody have any questions for Victoria? Other than seeing some familiar colors on there that I'm a little tired of,
Really?
Yeah, I think it's good. Any other comments? I'm looking
Mayor
at
Pike, the one thing I'll add is, and this is an effort to meet the strategic goal you gave us in October as a board, which was to maximize our political capital at the Capitol and make sure we're focused on the top priorities. And so Victoria's process here on the tiered system, we think achieves that goal. And then you would ratify as appropriate the issues in each tier as we go through the year.
makes sense to me. Is this something that you'd like us to approve by vote? Cameron?
Yeah, oh, go ahead, Cam.
Or Victoria?
No,
yeah.
Victoria.
Yeah, I think we are looking first that you approve of how we've decided to sift through these, and second, you approve of our process for prioritizing those factors, and then second, how we've currently categorized each of the issues we're working on. Gotcha.
Board members, I would look for a motion, if you're so inclined, to approve these legislative interim priorities and engagement levels as have been presented to us today.
I'd like to make that motion. This is Gary Hill.
I'll second that, Mayor Pike.
Motion's made by Gary Hill and seconded by Mayor Aaron Mendenhall. Any discussion on the motion?
Just to maybe. Sorry, go ahead, Mayor Niehaus.
I was just going to say, I can't believe we're still talking about plastic bags. And this is the only time that it's refreshing. I'd rather talk about plastic bags, I guess, than all these really serious issues, but can't believe it.
Thank you, Mayor. So noted.
Mayor Pike, this is Cameron.
What was that, Mayor Silvestrini?
I said plastic bags made a big comeback with COVID-19.
Yes, they did. Cameron?
Yeah, Mayor Pike, I think the last issue that Mayor Young wants to talk about up in Cache Valley right now is plastic bags. Am I right, Mayor Young? I'm going to assume I'm right because there's been major battle up there among the different cities in the Waste District.
Gary Hill, did you have another comment?
Just a brief one. I saw an email recently of an article from the Denver Post about what Colorado calls metro districts. It's the same as PIDs. I think that came either through or from league staff. Cam, would it be appropriate to send a link out to that to the board? It's a December 2019 article about sort of an expose on the problems that these PIDs have created in Colorado. It might be interesting and diversionary reading for our board right now.
Good idea. Will you
Yep,
send?
Carson Eilers on our staff has done a tremendous amount of research, so we'll have Carson send that out when we do our board follow-up.
Thanks.
Thank you, Cameron. Thank you, Gary. Any other comments on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously, and we'll go to item number 10, convention
Thank
update.
you.
Thank you, Victoria. All right, who's going to handle the convention? Is that going to be Katie?
Yep, it'll be Katie.
Okay.
And I assure you we can do the last 3 items in 10 combined minutes. So Katie, take it away.
Yes. So originally I was going to start off asking how the board felt being comfortable attending the annual convention in person. However, to speed it up a little bit, if it's okay, I'll share the link to this member survey that we've been emailing out over the last week. And if you don't mind taking a minute to just fill it out, there's a few questions. And then just so we know that what your thoughts are in the city and position section, if you just don't mind noting that you're a board member, whatever position with the board, that will kind of help us as we're going forward and planning the convention, if that's okay, Cameron. So speaking of the member survey, here are some of the results that we've had. While it doesn't represent every member, we've had 68 responses so far, and 84% of those are comfortable attending in person. 74% are comfortable attending a general session with hundreds of people, and most are comfortable with having smaller workshops with smaller groups of people. And overall, 75% would feel comfortable attending. That includes those who said yes or no in general, if there are supplies available and if social distancing practices are in place. So overall, there is some optimistic and positivity when it comes to attending the convention in person come September. And then moving on to the actual convention itself, right now, if you want to go to the next slide, Nick. Okay, right now we have 3 plans in place, and it kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. Plan A is the in-person event, which would essentially be a normal event with COVID modifications, being social distancing, no congregating. Plan B is the hybrid event, where we have the modifications for the in-person aspect and then streaming and virtual options available for those who can't attend in person or they don't feel comfortable attending in person. And then Plan C would be an all virtual event. So all sessions, exhibit hall would be available virtually for all the attendees. Right now, the hybrid event would ideally be the best way to go, because we can go either transition to an in-person or all virtual event, having everything all planned out. Luckily, the Salt Palace is willing to work with us to get the event to have an in-person aspect, including additional event space to allow distancing and lowering our food and beverage minimum. So they've been a pretty great partner in getting this up and running. And one final thing I would like to know is there are some staff concerns about the in-person aspect of the event, just due to unknown concerns and where things are going to be at in September. So that's why we have all these plans in place and trying to put everything together. So we're able to have our annual convention in September.
Thank you, Katie. What are your thoughts, folks? I assume you're looking for a little bit of feedback, Katie.
Yes, that'd be great if we have the time for it.
You have to be quick, but any thoughts? I mean, to me, it seems wise to plan on a hybrid for the reasons you said, Katie, but any thoughts, folks?
Hybrid sounds great.
I think hybrid's the way to go, because some people will want to attend in person and some people are still going to be more comfortable at home.
Yep.
Agreed.
Any different thoughts? All right. then I think at this point, it's basically, you've got the direction to proceed with a hybrid. Is that sufficient? Cameron?
Yep, it is. Thank you.
Katie, thank you for your efforts, and we look forward to it. I certainly hope for one that I can be there in person, and it might be nice, again, as has been mentioned, if we're able to come, as we're getting pretty used to with masks and so forth, just as you're describing. I think we could have a good convention, but I think the hybrid approach is smart. Okay, well, let's move on to the next item, which is, I believe, number 11. Is that correct? Which would be board and commission reports and appointments. Abby?
Yes, so I'll try and go through this pretty quickly, but at our last board meeting, we went over the Utah Outdoor Adventure Commission, and you guys went ahead and said that we could recommend Kate Bradshaw. Just as a reminder, we have like 1.5 appointments. So we have our appointment and then a joint appointment with the Utah Association of Counties. And then just kind of an update on that commission. Cam mentioned previously with the 4.0 plan that there's going to be a focus on outdoor recreation infrastructure. So that's why this appointment is pretty important, because they'll be the ones kind of deciding how to build that plan to spend those dollars. We've been working with UAC. They have their appointment. It's going to be Tom Fisher from Summit County. Right now, what we're doing is we're trying to fill a position. So Kate represents the Wasatch Front. Tom is Wasatch Back. So now we want to have our joint appointment be more rural. So we have that geographic representation. Their meeting is going to be this month, so we will need that appointment as soon as possible. So what would help me out is if there's any board members that are off the Wasatch Front, if they have anyone. Cam gave the example of, let's see, Wayne Okerlund. Like for him, he was a mayor and then was a county commissioner. So if there's someone that serves in both those roles, that would help us out. So anybody has a recommendation, let me know.
Okay, and so we would need to do that pretty quickly, but could we do that offline, Abby, I guess?
Yeah, that's fine. If you guys want to send me an email, if you think of anything or anyone, that would help me out.
Okay, let's do that. I might have a suggestion for you, Abby. Go ahead now. Yeah.
Okay, and then the second one was that private activity bond review. We would like to bring forward Tim Roper of Clearfield City. He's on their city council, and we think that he would be good for that role. We would have to bring that. It goes to the Senate, and then the governor approves it. So those are our 2 boards for today.
Questions, anybody? Would we need to make a formal motion to put forward the name of Tim Roper for the Private Activity Bond Review Board?
Yes, we would.
Okay, and that would be the only one you would need today, correct, Abby?
Yeah, since you guys already recommended that we could go with Kate, I don't think we'll need a motion for that. So let's just do the private activity one.
Okay. Unless there are questions, board members, I'd entertain a motion to appoint Tim Roper, Clearfield City Council member, to the Private Activity Bond Review Board.
So moved.
Don Christensen makes the motion.
I'll second it.
Allen, second.
Sounds like we got Mayor Silvestrini first, so he gets the second. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries unanimously. We'll go back now to number 12, vacancies, board vacancies and nominations, correct? and that's Nick.
Yes, correct. I will just scroll down here to get over to the nominations materials. Very quickly, we just want to bring it to your attention, the vacancies of those who will be going off the board this year. I will scroll down to here. You can see anyone highlighted in blue will be wrapping up their 2-year term or wrapping up a 2-year term that they're finishing for someone else if they were appointed. If everyone who is highlighted in blue didn't reapply or come back on the board in some form, we are looking for a few areas that we will need representation from. Area 6, 7, and 8, we will all need representation from coming up this next year when we do this in September. And then we will also need a representative from a town. Currently, Mayor Christensen represents Area 6 and is our town representative, and his term is expiring this year. We did change the bylaws a couple of years ago so that you can serve another term directly after serving a term. So if anyone's still interested in serving on the board and you happen to be highlighted in blue, just follow the steps that you see in the above documents to submit your nomination, or someone else nominates you. You could also run for second vice president. Anyone who's still on the board not going off can do that as well. Anyone going off can. So we will send this information out as by our constitution. This has to be sent out in June. We'll get it out to everyone. Hopefully those who are going off may want to join us for a little longer. And that's all I have for nominations. The last thing I would add while I have everyone, as I just go up to our agenda, we didn't really talk about this much, but you'll see on items, starting with item 7, we started to add what strategic goals are being applied to or are applicable to each one of these items. You'll know from our last meetings, we had been putting our strategic goals at the beginning, something just to remind everyone what we're trying to do long term. But now we've got these, we're putting the strategic goals at the end, and as you can see, that will just link straight over to them. So you can kind of see long-term how we're approaching these goals that we've set forward. So that's all I have for you.
Nick, very well done. Thank you. And thanks for making mention of that and it being on our agenda under each item. Any questions about the board vacancies? All right. Any other questions or comments? Cameron, any other business that I'm not aware of?
Thank you. This is a jam-packed meeting. You gave us some really good direction so we can get to work. Thanks, everybody.
All right. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Was that Mayor Mendenhall?
Mayor Niehaus.
Oh, sorry, Mayor Niehaus.
Second, Jewel Allen.
Second by Jewel Allen. All in favor, say aye.
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 Undebatable motion. We're adjourned. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.